Hi Wolfpack. Today I will be reading Pedro's Yo-Yos, how a Filipino immigrant came to America and changed the world of toys. Written by Rob Peñas, illustrated by Carl Angel, and published by Lee and Low Books Incorporated. This will be the first Bluebonnet book we read this year. Make it flip, leap, and swing. Roll it down between your hands or spin it forward on your leg. The tricks you can do with it are nearly endless. No wonder the yo-yo was the most successful toy ever to be made. And its popularity began with a Filipino immigrant seeking a better life abroad. When Pedro Flores was born in 1896, Spain ruled his country, the Philippines. The Spaniards forced their subjects to labor in the rice and tobacco fields and refused to let them travel outside their villages without permission. Yoked under this harsh rule, many Filipinos longed to gain freedom over their own lives. In their free time at school, Pedro and his friends played with a grooved disc carved from a water buffalo horn. This simple toy was called a yo-yo, which means come back in Tagalog, one of the many languages spoken in the Philippine Islands. The boys had endless fun with the yo-yo, swinging it on a string and competing with each other to conjure up the fanciest moves. The Philippine people rebelled against their colonial rulers right as Spain went to war against America. To escape this situation, the Spanish sold the country to the Americans for $20 million. It sounds like a lot, but it's only $3 per Filipino. Pedro watched the soldiers march through town, swaggering with confidence. Officials telling the Filipinos that they must read and speak English from now on. Listening to his new teacher, Pedro learned about the United States, a country across a vast ocean. American engineers built a highway through Pedro's province, stretching farther than anyone could see. Then, one by one, on foot or cart, Filipinos did something they had never done before. They began to leave. Letters came back, bringing hope for those who were weary and poor. In the United States, the letter said, people could live as they pleased. Why should Pedro miss a chance to create his own dream? When he was just 15 years old, Pedro left the Philippines for America. Pedro's ship passed through Hong Kong, where he marveled at its beautiful harbor at night, the modern battle fleet of Yokohama, Japan. After a month at sea, where he became horribly seasick, his steamer docked in Honolulu, Hawaii. Like his fellow Kabayan, Pedro labored in the pineapple fields under the burning sun, enduring long days with low pay. This was not why Pedro had come. After working for 2 years, Pedro journeyed to San Francisco, a city teeming with wooden houses, steep hills, and people of all races. Pedro did not stay long. He spent years working on steam strips bound for Mexico and Central America. One year, he traveled to Guam. Another voyage took him to Alaska, where the vessel got stuck. With no fresh water, the crew simply melted the ice to drink. And Pedro continued to become seasick often. Eventually, Pedro made another important decision. He decided to further his education. He spoke English well, and thanks to his teachers in the Philippines and his years of travel, although he was 8 years older than most of his classmates, he became one of the few students at that time to actually attend high school. That's an important choice to give an education. And Pedro wasn't going to let coming to America stop him. After a short time in college, Pedro moved to Santa Barbara, California, where he worked as a hotel bellhop, carrying people's suitcases up and down the stairs. Sometimes guests gave him a few coins. Other times, they gave him nothing. But now he was over 30 years old and felt no better off than when he left the Philippines. He wanted to find a way to work for himself. Pedro stayed with a family whose little boy, too young for baseball, had a rubber ball and only Pedro to play with. Back and forth, they tossed the ball for hours on end. Pedro knew he could make a much better toy. Pedro carved 2 discs out of wood and a small axle to join them. Then he twisted the twine into string to create a loop around the axle. When he threw the yo-yo, the loop allowed it to spin or sleep at the end of the string before it rolled back up into his hand. Pedro made it hop along the floor and spun it around his head in ever larger circles. His eyes lit up. What other fantastic tricks could his yo-yo do? Pedro taught the boy how to use his new toy. Then he taught his father and his mother and his aunties and the neighbors. He carved 8 to 10 yo-yos a day, painting some with beautiful designs, and his yo-yos sold out in no time. With the help of the boy's father, Pedro opened a factory to manufacture the yo-yos, but it couldn't keep up with the demand. Investors helped him open a second and a third factory, and that still wasn't enough. Soon, Pedro's factories were making hundreds of thousands of yo-yos a day. Other companies sold imitations called twirlers or whirligigs. Pedro's advertisement simply proclaimed, "If it isn't a Flores, it isn't a yo-yo." News spread quickly about the marvel called the Wonder Toy. Pedro came up with new tricks to show the yo-yo what the yo-yo could do. Clever moves that became known as rock the baby, loop the loop, and walk the dog. Pedro realized that when people saw the yo-yo in action, they clamored to get one for themselves. He hired Caballan to perform tricks outside candy stores and on street corners, anywhere children gathered. Boys and girls crowded around them to watch from around them wherever they went. With his team of Filipino experts, Pedro toured cities nationwide, holding yo-yo competitions in movie theaters and other venues. Some contests rewarded for those who could perform complicated tricks and not make any mistake, while other competitions challenged to see how long people could make their yo-yo spin at the string's end for the longest amount of time. No one ever had promoted a toy this way before, and the yo-yo craze swept across the land. Have you ever played a yo-yo? A Chicago businessman named Donald Duncan was impressed. The yo-yo sure was a darn good toy. Duncan offered to buy the company. He asked Pedro and his countrymen to stay on to promote the yo-yo throughout the country. Pedro readily agreed. He now had the freedom to do anything he pleased, and what he wanted to spend time bringing enjoyment to children. As years passed, the yo-yo grew in popularity. The word yo-yo even became part of our English dictionary. In 1985, the crew of the NASA Space Shuttle Discovery showed one off in outer space, where the lack of gravity made it move really slowly while spinning really fast. Yo-yo competitions are still held around the world, with contestants of all ages creating amazing new tricks. Pedro Flores did not invent the yo-yo, but thanks to his ingenuity, it became the favorite toy of millions of people everywhere. Pedro not only made a better life for himself, but he enriched the lives of countless others, adapting a Filipino pastime to create a toy with no limit beyond your imagination. And here is the real Pedro Flores. This book was a biography, rather. A biography is the story written about somebody by somebody else. If Pedro had written this book, it would be an autobiography, because he automatically knew the stories and what to write. See you next time, Wolfpack.